We have finished part 1, which was about Uzziah and the time of prosperity. And now we have come to part 2, which is about Jotham the king. And the stories of King Jotham are largely drawn from 2 Kings 15, verses 32 to 38, and 2 Chronicles chapter 27. And that brings us to chapter 3, Isaiah the prophet. Torn between his sympathy for King Uzziah and his wish to encourage and support King Jotham, Isaiah found himself constantly frustrated by the lack of attention to both the prevailing crime and corruption and the need for pure religion undefiled by idolatry. Nothing was being done about either one. Meanwhile, he faithfully visited Uzziah and was happy to see how much inspiration the king received from reading the scrolls. But around him, the kingdom was deteriorating. With Jotham alone on the throne, Isaiah became more aware than ever of the sinfulness of the people of Jerusalem. With Uzziah out of sight, and especially after his bad example, it seemed that everyone felt free to do whatever seemed right in his or her own eyes. After years of being co-ruler, Jotham was a good man of 25 years of age, only a few years older than Isaiah. He would certainly never attempt to go into the holy place as his father had done. Uzziah had been right to promote him. His foolishness had ceased when he began to share the throne. He was serious now, but much inferior to his father. Whatever would make his life easier seemed to be his preferred course of action. Corruption and idolatry were running rampant in the kingdom. He did nothing to try and stop them. Isaiah began to carry a heavy burden that he must do something, since King Jotham did not. He thought of the warnings Moses had given about the results of unfaithfulness. If something was not done soon, Judah might cease to exist as a kingdom. Then what would happen to God's promise to have a descendant of David on the throne? If he personally did nothing, was there anyone else who would attempt to halt the godlessness of the city? He did not think so. Already in his marriage, he had discovered that almost always Yishka was a good listener, and she usually had a sound head on her that showed itself in wise counsel. He determined to talk to her about his burden. She listened intently as Isaiah explained what was happening and what he felt he needed to do about it. Her knowledge of the wickedness in the city was far less than his, but even she, as circumscribed and protected as her life had been and still was, could see that God was not being sincerely worshipped. Dearest husband, I believe that God is laying this burden on your mind. Because of your position and connections, you will be safe in giving a straight testimony to the people. Everyone knows you as a righteous man, so nobody will accuse you of hypocrisy. Furthermore, God has given you the gift of words. He will help you write out your message in just the language that is needed. Her words of encouragement gave Isaiah the daring he needed to begin writing. But first he had a question for her. How will you feel if our friends no longer want to be seen with us? Such friends would be no loss to you or to me, she said promptly. That does not worry me at all. At the very least, my father and the other men with whom you have studied the scrolls will be happy that someone at last is speaking up for the truth. If our friends are truly friends, they will still like us. If not, I will find whatever friends I need. Anyway, there is always more than enough to do right here at home. Besides, I'm a little lonely for my mother and sisters. Maybe when you are busy, I will go see them more often. What a blessing you are to me, Isaiah smiled as he reached for her hands. Relieved that his burden, which was sure to be unpopular, was not going to affect the environment of his happy home. As he began to write, it seemed that his eyes opened ever wider to the critical situation. Yishka was right when she said God would help him with the words needed for the message. In the palace, he was familiar with legal language, and he used that to describe what God wanted to say to Judah. God has put Judah on trial. He calls on the universe as witnesses to the charges he brings. Maybe this would wake up their dull senses, and they would recognize the enormity of their transgressions. They have rebelled against him. They care less about him than a donkey does about its owner. The people are laden with guilt for their corruption and evil doing. They have turned their backs on the Holy One of Israel. You can read this entire chapter that he wrote in Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah loved that phrase, the Holy One of Israel. That was how he constantly thought of God, and he wanted to help everyone else see God in the same way. Too many people had bought into lies about God. They thought he was heartless and harsh, a God who was just looking to catch them doing something wrong so he could punish them. Somehow, Isaiah had to change their minds and help them understand God's great sympathy for their captive situation in a sinful world. Somehow, he had to help them see that they only had to give themselves into God's tender mercies, and he would protect them and give them the best possible life for now until it was time for them to join him forever in the better world to come. Why would they want to continue in the same path they were following when they were continually being beaten up, beset with injuries, and living in a desolate country that had been stripped bare and burned by enemies? The city of Jerusalem would become like a little hut in the middle of a vineyard or a melon field, a city under siege by enemies. Every other town around it would be in enemy hands. Only Jerusalem would be left free, but with great danger at the door. It didn't have to be that way if they would only return to God. This was an extraordinary spectacle that the universe could behold, seeing that Judah was guilty and acknowledging that God was justified in the course he was about to take against them. Not to punish them, they were punishing themselves, but to wake them up so he would be able to continue to bless them and fulfill his promises. Now, Isaiah, under God's guidance, turned his attention to the religious ceremonies in which the people regularly participated. The people of Jerusalem and Judah were as sinful as the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and yet they kept sacrificing at the temple of the Lord. Those things in the temple service that God had designed to remind them of the coming Messiah had now become meaningless rituals because of their sinful lives. In fact, God hated those rituals. He said, "Stop doing it. I've had more than enough burnt offerings. I don't take any pleasure in the blood of animals. I can't bear your holy assemblies. My soul hates your festivals. Your incense is detestable to me. I will not listen to your many prayers while your hands are full of blood." The lesson Isaiah wanted to impress upon Israel was the importance of holiness. Holy living is active living. It is even more than giving up sins. Righteous living is the only way to avoid iniquity. The people of Jerusalem needed to offer, as well as experience, justice. The oppressed, the fatherless, and the widows all needed care and compassion. God is always on the side of the victims. The oppressors must realize that they were arraying themselves against all the might and power of heaven. God invited them to discuss with him what could be done about their situation. They should be aware of how bad the conditions were in their lives. He wanted to make everything right and do more for them than they could imagine. He intended to bring their city back to how it had been when it was a shining light to the nation. In fact, he would make it even better than that. The alternative was grim. It was their choice whether they would seek the good in harmony with God or whether they would receive the bad by rebelling against God and not allowing him to work for them. They needed to know that those who forsake God are forsaking the fountain of living waters. In doing so, they seal their own doom. Isaiah read to Yishka what he had written. She looked very solemn and said, "If that is what God directed you to write, then it is what you should deliver. How did you know to say that Jerusalem is like a hut in the middle of a field? It's not like that now." "I just sensed that it was the right thing to say." "My dear husband, I believe it is prophetic. We're beginning to see what God has planned for you. Time will tell, but I think you are a prophet." Then Isaiah knew exactly how Ruel had felt when he said there was no way God would put a prophetess in his home. He looked at Yishka, then put his head in his hands and felt his heart sink. What could he say? He did not want any more responsibility. Yishka put her arms around him and asked, "Where will your message go from here?" Aware that that was an important question, he laid aside his feelings and answered, "I'm not exactly sure. Should I read it in the palace or should I read it in the temple? This will be the first time people hear something like this from me. What will they think?" "Read it first to my father and his friends. See what they advise you." "That's a very good idea. I will go there this afternoon. Will you go with me?" "Yes, I'll be happy to go. I would like to watch their faces as they hear this." Isaiah added, "I will not tell the others, but I will tell you that I also plan to read it to King Uzziah. He is receiving great blessings from reading the scrolls. He is actually memorizing them. He tells me he wishes he had taken time to study them before. It would have made all the difference. I want to see what he says about this message." As could be expected, the reaction of godly people was positive. They appreciated the good news as well as understanding the reason for the bad news. Ruel spoke for all of them when he expressed amazement. Just imagine! God invites sinful people to come, to discuss with him, to reason together. What kind of God must he be to suggest that? And he has such good plans for us, even when so much sin abounds around his holy city. We need to share these ideas everywhere. So many people think he is out to get us, that we have no chance of escaping punishment from him. This makes me think it is someone else who is sending the punishment and then trying to blame it on God. Isaiah spoke up. "Where would you suggest I go next with this message?" "To the temple," said one. "To the palace," said others. "Both places," responded several. "I believe you are right," Isaiah said. "And before Yishka and I leave, I would ask you to have prayer with us. Please pray that our minds will be open to receive this message. Pray that I will have the courage and conviction to present it properly. Pray that Jerusalem will turn to God and become a holy city, filled with faithfulness to him, so he can do for us what he would like to be able to do." Several prayed, and as the last man prayed, he added this phrase, "And thank you, our Father, that you have sent us a new prophet." And the whole group responded with a hearty, "Amen." Uzziah had much the same response. His love and appreciation for Isaiah were great. With tears in his eyes, he said, "God could not have found a better man. All your life he has been preparing you for this. May he bless and strengthen you to share his messages with the people who will not be happy to hear them." Again, Isaiah's life almost failed him when he thought of himself as a prophet. Only his faith in God's guiding could carry him through. The crowds at both the temple and the palace were happy to listen to a message from Isaiah. He had such stature and influence that he must be about to say something good and important to them. But after listening to him, they started to grumble. Who does he think he is, to say we are as bad as Sodom and Gomorrah? What's wrong with him? Doesn't he know we are God's special people? And he would never want anyone to talk to us like this. At least nobody but one of the prophets. Some of them have had some harsh messages. And you know what happened to them. Isaiah better watch out. He must be under the influence of some legalistic people. I know who some of those could be. Maybe his father-in-law wrote that for him. No, I bet it was his wife. She gets messages, you know. Ha 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 ha. They all laughed before they became serious again. I hope he does not come around with any more messages. And how would you stop Isaiah? He has more power and prestige in the court than anyone else. That's true. I guess I'll just leave if he comes to give another message. That evening, when Isaiah reached home, he found to his surprise that Anya was waiting for him. She did not look happy. Yishka had offered her some food which she had refused. She didn't want to talk to anyone but her son. How could you do this to me? She fumed. Do what? What have I done to you? Isaiah asked. Embarrassed me forever in front of my friends? Okay, I guess you better explain what you're talking about. Were you at the temple today when I spoke? No, I was not. I was enjoying myself at the best high place. But it didn't take long to hear what a fool you had made of yourself. Your evaluation does not match that of everyone who heard me. Oh, yes? And what did they say? She queried. That God must have given me the words of the message because they fit perfectly with what is happening in Jerusalem and throughout Judah. I was told that you said Jerusalem is no better than a hut. I did say that, and I'm not sure why I did, but those were the words that came to me. Maybe in a few years we will see that happen. Anya was exasperated. Are you saying that you were prophesying? We will have to wait and see. And what is it to you? Right now I have an appointment with a friend. With that, Isaiah stomped out of the house, ignoring supper and leaving his mother sitting there. Yishka could understand his reaction, since she had heard many stories from him about his mother. Nevertheless, one's mother is to be respected, right? So what was she supposed to do now to smooth over his disrespect? After a few uncomfortable minutes, she hesitantly invited Anya to walk out in the garden with her. Not knowing what else to do, Anya followed her daughter-in-law outside. Yishka talked about what she had started and what she hoped to do in the garden, and asked Anya if she had ever had a garden. No, she definitely had not. She had never thought of doing any gardening, because she lived in the palace, and all of that was taken care of by gardeners. Yishka asked, how would you like to plant something here just to watch it grow and see how it works? If it had been anyone else, she probably would have abruptly refused. But Yishka was so gentle and sweet that Anya suddenly thought, why not? Yes, she said, I would like to try it out. Would you like to have rosemary and parsley in your yard? They taste so good in food. Oh, yes, I would love to have them. I've been thinking that we needed to plant herbs so they would be right here and fresh when we want to use them. Okay, agreed Anya. I know where to get some plants, and I'll bring them tomorrow. With that, she escaped without any more conversation. The peace and quiet after the storm was a relief. Now Yishka waited for Isaiah to come back so she could tell him what had happened. When he finally dared come back home, he apologized for leaving her to pick up the pieces. He said he realized that his bad attitude toward his mother was something he needed to pray about. Over the next few years, Isaiah felt the burden to speak to the nation 4 more times. You can read those messages in the Old Testament's book of Isaiah, chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5. Just as he did when writing court history, he thought long and hard about how to word the messages from God. First to make them memorable, then also to reflect the purest and best writing in Hebrew literature. As he wrote, it became more and more obvious that he was often predicting what would happen in the future. Often the message about the future was God's exciting plans for a renewed kingdom of righteousness. Other times, it was a warning about the future for those who rebelled against God, that their leadership was to be taken away, and there would be famine and misery. But then again, God would promise, tell the righteous it is well with them, for they will enjoy the fruit of their deeds. But his words also made it clear that God was not arbitrarily causing anyone to suffer. They have brought disaster upon themselves, Isaiah 3:9. God, the righteous judge, was paying attention to what was happening, and in time their futures would be settled with fairness and justice. Even the women were warned that they would suffer for their ungodly and shallow attitudes and actions. Again, though, the message would return to the glorious future God planned for the righteous. There would be survivors, and the branch of the Lord would provide everything they needed. Because of all their godless behavior, God was giving permission to the surrounding nations to come and almost destroy Judah. Also, during King Uzziah's lifetime, there was a very strong earthquake. People had to flee for their lives. Zechariah 14:5. Some were crushed and killed by falling debris. Many interpreted that event as a call from God to come into harmony with Him if they wanted to continue living rather than to die in such a disaster. Archaeologists have found evidence in the area for an earthquake of that strength. A great relief to Isaiah at this time was the news that Micah, a godly man from Moresheth, about 25 miles southwest of Jerusalem, was beginning to preach the same messages of warning to sinners, as well as God's love and compassion for His people. Although there were those who complained, a growing segment of the population thought the messages were exactly what Judah and Jerusalem needed. Both Isaiah and Micah were referred to more and more often as prophets. King Jotham was supportive of their messages, but he still did not do anything to change the situation in the nation. Uzziah's health was progressively declining. He still memorized the scrolls, and Isaiah still visited him, reading him his messages. It seemed that his death could happen soon. The most surprising development during those years was that Anya loved gardening. She planted herbs, and then more herbs, and then more yet. Hardly a day went by that she wasn't in the yard nurturing her plants. Yishka treated her with respect and kindness. Anya soon gave up trying to control her and grew to love her instead. Less surprising, Yishka and Isaiah had a baby daughter. How precious and loved she was. When the new baby arrived, Anya instantly became an enthusiastic grandmother. She was in their house almost constantly. Isaiah was a bit offended that she had wanted nothing to do with him, but now she wanted everything to do with little Ruth. He was leery of the possible results and warned Yishka to never leave Anya and the baby alone. He didn't want to come home someday and learn that his daughter had been taken to worship idols. Anya was so occupied with the baby that she had little time for her usual complaints to Isaiah. He wasn't even sure she had time to go worship the idols or visit the high places. It was no surprise when word came that Isaiah's life was nearing its end. Isaiah was called because there were those who knew that he had continued visiting the leper, even though he had limited physical contact with him. Hurrying to the little house in the back garden, he prayed with his cousin, his friend, and reassured him that a better life was soon to come for him. No one else came to visit or mourn. He died with Isaiah by his side. He could not be buried with the rest of Judah's kings because of his leprosy, but he was buried nearby in a field that was owned by the kings. With one less responsibility, Isaiah dedicated himself more than ever to his family and his work. Under King Jotham, his court responsibilities were greater. He was now the chief historiographer for the kingdom. He had no intention of ignoring his wife and daughter. His happiest hours were with them. It seemed to him that he had written the messages that needed to be given. His responsibility for that was over. He would not have to be an ongoing prophet. The idea was a huge relief. He would not have to continue to counter the resistance he had already experienced, and that he knew would continue if he delivered more messages. He had done enough. He shrank from the thought of continuing to deliver messages of warning and reproof from God. The task seemed hopeless. It was Micah's turn to experience that rejection. Isaiah would go to the temple to pray about his decision. He felt sure God would understand.